Good morning, Vicki. How are you doing?
Great, Ryan. How are you?
Doing good. We were both just chatting about how we wish we were not in Minnesota, even though we were over Skype. And you've been traveling into the west side of the states, and you and I met at Palm Springs at the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. So you have some really cool things that you've done in your past. And for the listeners that aren't too familiar with it, maybe just take us back, Vicki. What was the day that you decided to be an entrepreneur, and how did that all transpire?
Yeah, well, it's pretty funny. I'm sure that most people say this, that you don't really just decide to be an entrepreneur, right? You think about things from a very different perspective, but when you look at it in hindsight, you realize that that was when you wanted to become an entrepreneur. So back in 2003, I was an executive at an enterprise software company, and it was a large, growing, very successful company, and it was really looking to be sold. They had brought in a new CEO. They were kind of going through the process of getting the company ready to be sold. It was a public company, but they knew that they were not maximizing the value in the public market. And so they were kind of in that mode of, they stopped product advancement, and they were kind of cutting costs, and it was just, the writing was on the wall. And I was feeling like I didn't really want to be working in that reductive type of environment. And so I basically, raised my hand and said, I'll take the package and really start to look for something else. I was a VP of strategy at the time.
What kind of business was it?
Enterprise software. So it was a company called Retech, which ultimately got bought by Oracle.
Okay.
And so very successful, large retail enterprise software company, sold to the top retailers all over the world. I ran a number of aspects of the business during my time there. Ran a separate business unit, which is probably when I really got the entrepreneur's bug, the kind of that internal, it was an entrepreneur role, really, if you will. And ran strategy, ran product development, ran services. And so, I was really very much in the idea of how do you create value for customers? That was kind of my thing. And so when you get into that environment where a company is getting ready to be sold and it's obvious and things kind of stop and slow down, I was ready to move on to something else. And so I took some time off. I had a 6-month non-compete. And what we realized at the time when we left was that we really saw this idea of the mass accumulation of data, right? That was coming out of retail, both from a consumer and a transaction level. There was RFID, there was loyalty, there was, social was just starting to become something important, right? But there was really no systems that could take in and utilize that data at such a low level. I mean, everything was really designed to present information in an aggregate, not at an atomic level. And so I really felt that there was something there. And so when I took my time off, that was really kind of simmering in the back of my mind. And in August of that same year, so I left in March of 2003. In August of that year, I called a number of former colleagues, and some had moved on to other jobs. Others were still at Retech as it was preparing to be sold. And I really reached out to people that I thought had diverse capabilities and ways of thinking. And my thought process was, if I was going to start a company, who would I want to be in it with me? And so much of what my thinking of when I started Quantum was around, who do I want to be working with? And so at the time, there were 5 of us in total, 4 other people, and I was living in Breckenridge, Colorado. And everybody came out, and we spent 3 days together brainstorming and thinking about what the future of data in the retail industry looked like and how that information was going to be leveraged to create value. And we came up with a bunch of ideas, and we split ourselves up into kind of feasibility groups to do some analysis. And from there, over time, we kind of narrowed our scope to a platform that used what is now called machine learning, right?
You're way ahead of your time. Holy cow.
On low-level transaction data to drive profitability into the retail supply chain. So that was in August. By October, everyone had quit their jobs. And in January of 2004, we started Quantum Retail. And so it's really a classic entrepreneur's story. We saw a need in the market. But I think our twist is that we looked at who do we really want to work with and create our company with a group of really talented people.
That's super cool. So, as far as like the partner, were they partners? Did you guys all jump in together and contribute your own, whether it was financing or floating your own payroll until you guys actually started making money?
Yeah, that's exactly what we did. So we had 5 of us. We created a company with 5 equal shareholders. We all put in a very nominal amount of money to fund expenses for the first 6 months or so to the year. And we didn't take salaries until probably 18 months into it.
Okay.
And even then, you start out with what do you need to survive?
Right.
We didn't go from 0 to, $150,000 or $250,000 a year. We were like, okay, what's the minimum that you need?
Can I pay for my vehicle?
Exactly. Can you pay your mortgage payment and feed your kids? Right. Yep. So, we really started from 0, and amazingly, we actually bootstrapped the company through the duration.
That's super cool. So a couple questions, because for 5 partners, did you have any concerns about that? And then maybe the second part of that question is, what were the different skill sets that allowed you, when you said who do you want to work with? So, and then how did that work with your ability to determine whether you wanted to partner up with 5 people?
Right. So I'll start with the piece about the skill sets, right? So my background was really in, strategy, but overall business management. I came out of an early financial background, but have really been running business units and components of businesses through much of my career. A lot of strategy work, a lot of go-to-market work, a lot of, positioning. And so I really kind of knew finance, operations, and strategy, if you will. We brought in one of my business partners was the former chief technology officer, an EE by trade, came up through Accenture, worked as a CTO and in heading up development. So he had a real technical background. One of my partners was Dr. Linda Whitaker, really one of the top people in the country in retail-related operations research, kind of an ops person from a algorithms perspective. So she understands business models and algorithms, did a lot of retail science work. Very, very experienced, very knowledgeable. One gentleman two of the gentlemen were then out of the UK. One of them was a specialist and probably one of the best team builders that I've ever worked with, and also really understood the European market and was a kind of a services and delivery expert, if you will. And the last guy was really kind of an overall real strategist, deep thinker, guy out of Oxford in the UK, really got big picture stuff. And so, it was a very, very diverse group, both in terms of skills and perspective and work experience, but we had all kind of met up through Retech.
What a cool group of people to be able to talk to on a daily basis.
Yeah, it was. Sometimes you look back and some of the funnest times were before we had a product and we're making any money, and just the ideas and the excitement and all of that. So, in retrospect, right, they were all necessary to create the company, I think. Those skills. And so I don't think we would have become what we had if we hadn't had everybody. I would say, hindsight being 2020, I'm not 100% convinced we should have all been partners, kind of equal partners throughout it. It makes it really makes
things challenging.
5 partners is a lot of partners, right?
A lot of cooks in the kitchen, as I would say,
right? It is a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but we had our challenges. And I think some of the biggest challenges come from, over time, people's lives change, right? I mean, somebody has kids, somebody gets married, somebody gets sick. And everybody's priorities can start to change over time. And so when may have all been in the exact same place in 2004, things might look different in 2014.
What were some of the things that changed that threw curveballs your guys' way?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it, I guess, if you think about, the company obviously went through many of the ups and downs that companies go through, right? You grow, you maybe overbuild a little bit. You got to contract at some point. You start out making no money, and everybody has a different tolerance for how much they can reinvest in sweat equity versus getting paid out, right? And so grapple with those as you move along. One of your partners says, hey, I can't live on $80,000 a year, right? I need to be making a market wage, right? And so then you decide, do you pay that person more? Does everybody get a raise? And can you afford to give everybody a raise?
Yeah.
And so, things like that.
Lots of dynamics with 5 people.
Yeah, it is. The dynamics of, do we continue to pay everybody the same thing, or do we create different salaries based on their position in the company? We made the choice to continue to pay consistent wages across the board because we knew that our big payout was going to be at an exit.
Okay.
Right.
So did you on that note, I think that's a really good point. Did you guys plan for the exit from the inception, or did that transform over the time with the conversations between the 5 of you?
Yeah. I think everybody at that point in time, it was 2004. I think, tech was booming again, right? And I think everybody's goes into this thinking they're going to be a millionaire, right? So you always think that selling your company is the goal, right?
Okay. Yep.
I don't think any of us went into this thinking we're going to build a company that's going to become a public company. But I don't think we started out with a structure and a thought process around how would we sell the company.
It was just more, let's build something and then think about it, knowing.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And I think that, a lot of people probably think, I'll build a good company and then it'll be worth something, right? And it's not a bad way to think. And oftentimes that works out. But, my view in hindsight would be, there are many things that you can do that are good for an exit that don't stop you from building a good company, right? And you should do them. It's not mutually exclusive to think about that very consciously in the early stages. And as you move along and as you pivot your business, which ultimately a lot of people don't, at some point in time, even if there's small corrections, making sure that you're continuing to think, how is this helping create value for my business that somebody would pay for?
Well, I think you hit on some amazing points there. And I'm curious, when you think about, you said that a lot of businesses pivot and all. So, Vicki, one of the things that I see, whether it's our clients or people we interview or what I went through, is how those decisions that you are making as you're building the business could change depending on how you want to exit, and tying those potentially two together. How did you guys, what was your business model and how did you go to market? I'm just curious, was it a product? Was it services? And then did you pivot, and would you have done things differently from your business model had you known who you were going to sell to?
Yeah, I think I would have so let's start with what was the business model, right, and how did that grow? So we started in 2004. We had very grand ideas of being a SaaS-based company. And as many software companies of that time, who bootstrap, you basically look to your first customer to, what is this first general product going to look like, right? And so we found our first customer, which was Guitar Center, and they funded the development of our first product. They had no desire to be a SaaS platform.
Okay.
And so we said, okay, well, we'll build it for them. And then we look at every time when you do something like that, then you say, okay, I build version number 1 is the Guitar Center version, right? Now, what am I going to do to that to make that generally available to the broader market? And as we were doing that, we got our next customer, and they were like, no, we like what you've got there, right? we just need these other things. And so we built onto that. And so what ended up happening is that we continued to develop kind of deployable software versus a SaaS model software.
Can you define that? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So to me, deployable software is something that's really designed to be hosted inside your firewall. And so our software was mission critical. We were building large replenishment and optimization and allocation systems for the world's largest retailers. So this was a mission critical system. We weren't selling them some little marketing tool. They were, these were multi-million-dollar deals with significant implementation because they were deeply connected. And at the time, people were still very reluctant to have those types of systems in a standalone software as a service environment where we would be doing the hosting and they didn't have that on their servers.
So, when totally get it. And was there a ratio between services of implementation, so like labor costs versus like quote unquote software costs? I mean, did you have a balance between the two, or?
Yeah, we did, and I would say we probably had more services work than we would have liked, but it was something that they needed a lot of help with. I mean, these were people were. One of the good things we did do was put subscription licenses in place, so regardless of where they deployed the software, they paid for it on a recurring basis, which was really important to our business model.
Did you guys intend to do that, or did it kind of naturally come out of that? And did you do that?
No, we intended to do that. That was a business model structural piece. The other piece would have been to have made the move to SaaS deployment, where we hosted it earlier. And we wound up doing that later in our life, but I would have, in retrospect, I would have forced us to do that earlier, even if it had cost us some of the deals that we got, because it's a philosophical thing about how to create value for that company. And if you looked at where valuations were going at the time, SaaS valuations were so much higher than enterprise software, regardless of what you were delivering or how you were operating.
So I think you just kind of naturally moved into the second part of the question that I was having. So you guys did end up pivoting, and it was because of the value that would have been driven off of that for the enterprise. But I think, what's the dialogue? Because I think internally with your partners and your clients, because I think what you said, Vicki, is something that a lot of people struggle with, where shifting a business model like that to create enterprise value has a little bit of a short end where it might cost more, whether it's from deals or you're actually investing into the infrastructure because you're shifting your business model. I mean, how did you guys talk about that? And was that the goal, were the enterprise value?
The goal, well, there's two things. One is that that's where the market's moving. Okay. And we knew that even if customers weren't demanding it today, they were going to need it down the road. That's how people were starting to think about their businesses. It's, AWS came online, Azure came online, it really started to be obvious that over time, software systems were going to move to a SaaS related model. And so it was both from a market perspective in terms of what customers would eventually want, and also from an enterprise valuation perspective of what the market was willing to pay. The market was willing to pay for, not customers. So that was definitely there. And once you kind of get into this mode, that was a big investment for us to do. And so one of the things that, if I look back, hindsight being 2020, we probably should have taken money earlier on to fund that.
What was some of the things that cost money? Was it like a data center infrastructure that you were buying out, or was it
was moving
cash
the
flow?
No, it was never infrastructure. It was all about the investment that would have to go into creating a different software model.
Okay.
And then the business model itself is different, right? You have, when we would do transactions, we would make money on our transactions. SaaS businesses are designed differently. They have long tails in terms of, you need to have recurring revenue. You usually don't make money in your early years. And so that whole business model shift was going to cause us, if we couldn't kind of transition it on top of our existing business model,
Yep.
it was going to cost us a lot of cash.
Well,
and with a bootstrap model, you really don't have that cash to just kind of wait
Yep.
for a model to kick in, right?
So was it like something like, I'm just trying to think of from my old experience and maybe for the listeners, where like, if it's going to be $1 million deal, you recognize the cash, you're funding your operations by doing that, and to shift it where that $1 million instead might be spread over, 5 years, where it's,
Yes.
50 to 100 grand a month instead of $1 million, which is a significant challenge when you need to pay bills.
Right. And I think that, so part of it is just by design, how the cash flows into you. But I think the other piece is that in early periods, you typically absorb a lot of costs as part of a SaaS program. And so you're willing to operate, you're willing to provide services and training and things up front that go into an initial stage of an implementation as part of an overall business model that may not get you at profitability in an early year. But then in the second year, you're doing less. And in the third year, you're making 90% margin.
Yep. Which is pretty solid.
That's right. I mean, so you have to kind of look at it as a 3-year horizon where and if you do it successfully and you get a lot of customers in the beginning in the market, you lose a lot of money. So it's a really hard trade-off. It's very difficult to make that move. Many companies take years and years to do it.
So as you guys are going through this, and I can only imagine that when you throw 5 partners and different needs on top of that scenario, where did the conversation start going as you're, striving to change the business model and increase, the enterprise value? What was the dialogue with the 5 people? Was there a triggering event in the marketplace or internally that said, we need to potentially look at what we want to do with the ultimate, vision of the business and the exit?
Yeah. So, this was, I can't pinpoint it exactly, but I mean, from a timeline perspective, I think we knew that we were starting to hit some limits to our growth related to our bootstrap model. And that we did want to kind of make this migration, if you will, to a new way of delivery. And we kind of did some exit planning. So you would understand this, right? Your background is this is all about what you tell people, right? We actually did a pretty critical strategic planning process in 2011 and looked at these things and mapped some of these things out. And in conjunction with that, we went through an exit planning process.
Oh,
and so each of us had individual things, and we got together and looked at things as a group. We worked with an outside consultant who helped us with that. And what we came to agreement on was that we knew that we wanted to seek some type of liquidity event or exit in a 3 to 5 year horizon. That's kind of where people were.
Okay. And then when you get, I'm curious because I think a lot of entrepreneurs, Vicki, think in terms of, I'm sick of being leveraged. I'm sick of having this, all my eggs in one basket. When you guys, outside of the financial liquidity that I think a lot of entrepreneurs want to strive for, were there other things throughout this process that you guys determined that would be important table stakes for you? I mean, you got, especially with 5 people with 5 different, ideas of how this baby that you guys have all built together, it represents them, whether it's the legacy, the software code, the culture, all those different things. Did you have other ways that you layered on all the different other variables that could be important in creating that liquidity?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's really kind of two axes to this, right? One is, are you mentally and emotionally ready to leave the business? And the other is are you financially ready to leave the business, right? Are you going to get what you want out of it or what you need from a financial perspective? And then are you emotionally ready to let go of this? And that goes back to, are you in the role that you want to be in, right? Are you, are you still excited about what we're doing? Are you enjoying this, right? Do you view your time here as an opportunity cost versus are you thinking, gee, I could go out into the market based on my experience now and command a much higher salary? Or, what is your personal horizon? And so with 5 partners, everybody was in a different place.
No kidding.
And what it led us to say is that we aren't ready to sell because as a group, we were kind of all over the map. But over this time, and we felt that there was more upside to the business. And that was a really important piece, right? And so we thought that within that time period, we could lay out a framework that would allow us to do some things. And we made changes to our roles in the business. Actually, a couple of the founders left the business on a day in and day out basis. They didn't leave their stake in the business, but they went out to go do other things.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so, people were flexible in terms of saying, not everything, quantum isn't going to give me everything I want right now. I'm not ready to walk away from my investment in it, but I'm ready to go do some other things. And so we developed, we expanded our management team. We did some other, interesting things. I think we really looked at that time frame and saying, now intentionally, what are we going to do to maximize the value of the business over this time?
So super interesting because I think, just kind of hearing it, and I'm assuming the experience that you had is that priorities shifted and you guys did some very intentional things. Like the intentions were there is what I'm hearing. And when you guys were thinking about liquidity, Vicki, was it like you mentioned that, you weren't planning on going and doing an IPO. So what were the different exit thoughts or buyers or who, you had to have started formulating some sort of ideas behind that. And then did those precipitate some of the strategies that you were implementing?
Yeah. So really, a couple of years, we actually went in 2012 as part of this process, went out into the market to get an outside CEO. We actually identified that maybe one of the things we need is to bring in somebody from the outside. We had grown the business. We kind of, all had a hand in it. And maybe we need somebody who's really kind of taken a company to the next stage and help them exit and bring them in and kind of let them lead us down this path. And the person we brought in knew that this is where we were going. We were seeking a liquidity to maximize the value of the company for a liquidity event over a 3 to 5 year time horizon.
So one question on that too, because I think, I don't know if you're familiar with Traction.
Very, very familiar.
So then, there's this whole visionary integrator, and then you got the 5 owners, which I think is very unique how you guys determine that you can be an owner, but you don't have to work in the company. Right. So then there's this whole question that we've been exploring, and it's how do you hire this integrator or the visionary, these different roles? And then I think a lot of entrepreneurs get freaked out because if you were to say what you just said to someone that is the caliber that you need for this, what are they going to say? I want equity or I want something. And so how did you structure this where you can align all the 5 different partners with someone that can actually do this? Was it salary, stay bonuses, phantoms? What was the structure behind it?
Yeah. So I'll give you the structure and then I'll finish the story because it's actually kind of an interesting story. So we brought in this outside CEO and he was given a very nice salary, and a bonus plan and stock options. And everybody in our company had options. So I mean, we had options from the onset. So we always gave, everybody in our company who, from the, administrative assistant, up through executives had varying levels of equity that we gave as options. And so, by the time we sold the company, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 or 8% of the company was, owned by employees or former employees. So this person was given a very nice package to come in with the mission of maximizing value for this liquidity horizon. And it was a real challenge. That was at the time we said, okay, this person's going to come in. A couple of people said, hey, you know what? I'm not interested in working for somebody else, but we think this is the right thing to do. I'm going to go do something else. And so time ticks by and it's coming into 2013, and this guy isn't moving the needle the way we need him to. And so, we gave him time. We let him bring in different management. We made a lot of changes to the business, and he really wasn't moving the needle the way we needed him to. And so we actually made a call 2 years into the process, or close to it, to say, it isn't working out. We have to part ways. And at that point in time, we said, we're gonna get the company ready to sell it ourselves.
So did someone come in and did one of you take over the CEO role then?
Yeah. So the people who had left the business came back. One of my partners, Chris Allen, took over as the operational CEO, and I took over to lead the process for the sale of the company. And so what we did is over a kind of, I would say, 6 to 9 months leading up to us initiating a process, we totally buttoned up the ship. I mean, we went out and secured major contracts. We landed a couple of new clients. We, got our cost structure in order. We really kind of clamped down and said, this business needs to be operating like it's creating value, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
was there anything else that you did that to be, to take your words, to create the value? So you clean up the financials. Was there any other specific things that you did that maybe he didn't do, or he did, or somewhere in that building the value that you really thought was a good idea?
The biggest thing that we did is we went in with one of our major clients and renegotiated a 5-year contract with them, which was a huge contract. It was, over $50 million. And, it should have been done long ago. We brought in a CFO who was a transaction CFO, and we had done a lot of planning from a business perspective ahead of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we had fully audited financials back to 2008. Mm-hmm. We had very clean HR records. We went through a process of making sure all of our key contracts were secure prior to going into the market. We made sure that our financials and our ability to predict what was coming down the road from a revenue forecast perspective and a cash perspective was 100% sound, so we could hit or exceed our numbers that we were positioning. Mm-hmm. We made sure that we had all of our key positions filled going into that process. And so, I think that the CEO that we hired really thought that he was going to come back to us and say, which he did, say, hey, we need to go out and just get equity, and this is what I think we're going to be able to get, and this is probably what you're going to have to give up. And it was like somebody talking who wasn't an entrepreneur, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't his business. He was like, yeah, I think this is what you should do. And it was a bad answer, right? It was like, we could have sold the business 2 years ago and made more money than that.
Right.
And so we really went through and did a big cleanup sweep.
So did you guys have a target dollar amount that a couple things on exactly what you guys, because the reason my question is you guys are a very strong team that you had built, and you had a lot of strategic thinkers. And so I think there was a lot of intentionality of what you guys were doing, which is awesome. So who were you planning on positioning this to sell to? And then was it a dollar amount that you guys were going for the business, or was it a net dollar amount per one of your 5 partners? What were the benchmarks that you were striving for?
Yes and yes. So a lot of this was about, and we were very intentional in our process as well. I mean, so we said, here's what we think the business is worth based on our revenues and our multiple of revenues, and looking at the things that we think the market has to bear. Is this something that everybody feels comfortable with? And people were like, yes. If we can exit within a year and get that amount, we feel pretty good about that.
So with the being comfortable, was that when you say, within a year, does everybody intend of completely walking away, or was it, was that part of that?
We didn't know. right? I mean, what we went through a process. We went through a very rigorous process of finding we worked with an investment banker, and they were good. They were specialists in selling companies of our size in the technology space. They weren't kind of, oh, if we don't sell you, then we can get you some equity or we can get you some debt financing or whatever. These guys did like 70 transactions a year.
Wow.
This was what they specialized in. And they knew everybody in the marketplace that we would want to have access to. And so we, worked. First of all, we talked to 20 investment banking firms,
Whoa.
interviewed 6, and got down to this one. Because you know how it is when you have a firm, somebody's always calling you to say, hey, do you want to sell your company? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so, we had a list a mile long of people who said that they wanted to talk to us, but, we quickly went through and narrowed it down and got the group that we wanted. And during that interview process, we asked people to value our company. How would you value our company and who would you position us with in the market? And these guys came back with the right answers in terms of how we thought about our business, how we felt the market thought about our business, and a range, right? And nobody says, here's the number you're going to get. They give you a range of what they thought that they could get in the marketplace. And we felt comfortable that if we were within that range, we would hit the numbers that we felt we wanted as individuals.
And that along those, because with that many people, which is awesome, you're getting some serious feelings, and you're getting a read on the pulse of the marketplace too.
Right.
How did your visions or perspectives of the potential buyers change? Was it private equity? Was it, actual clients? Was it, strategic partners? What was the kind of the spectrum?
Right. Well, we had like 3 levels, right? But our first choice was a strategic, right? Was finding somebody who felt that our product suite fit into their model, right? The second were like PE and financial buyers, if you will. And the third was somebody who maybe wants our technology to take it within themselves and kind of take it out of the market.
Mm-hmm.
The third level, we really didn't go anywhere near. I mean, to us, that was maybe if one of our customers wanted to buy the technology, and we really didn't want to go down that path. So we didn't spend a lot of time on that.
Mm-hmm.
So we went into the market with a full process around strategics and PEs. And we did management calls with 30 to 40 companies. And we had management meetings with 7 companies, and we had offers from 3.
Wow.
And we had offers from a strategic, we had an offer from a financial buyer, who was really just kind of doing a calculation on a napkin and saying, this is what I'll pay you. And then we wound up going with somebody who was kind of a hybrid.
Ooh, interesting.
Of that, yeah. So the company that we wound up going with was a company called Versata. I don't know if you know who they are.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah, there's a company called Trilogy Software out of Texas, Austin, Texas. And it's a privately owned company that does almost $1 billion in revenue a year. And it's enterprise software. And Versata is their acquisition arm. And their business model is one of going for customers that have complex products, which we had, machine learning integrated into multi-billion-dollar environments, right? And a tier 1 customer list, which we had, some of the best retailers in the world in our customer list, and has long contracts and customers who continue to use their product over a long period of time. And that was their business model. So because they do a lot of acquisitions, they do a ton of acquisitions, tons. In this space, they had the rigor of a financial buyer, but they saw the value from a strategic perspective.
Yeah. That's really cool. So so many questions. So what I think is really cool, Vicki, is your exposure in the process and the diligence you guys took. How would you, because, to get to that perfect buyer, look at the numbers from the investment bankers all the way down to calls. Right. And to get to that perfect situation, how did your guys' dialogue as a team and education change over that process? I mean, what were some of your insights before you started the process, and then leading up to that? How did things evolve internally as a team?
I think it was really good. I mean, we had all of our team was good. We had smart people, and we knew how to position our company, and we knew how to talk about our company. And every time you meet with somebody, you refine that pitch. And so I was, I really managed and led the process, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But then Chris, who was the CEO, really came in as the guy. He and I tag teamed almost every management call.
Okay.
And he was there as the CEO, playing the lead, pitching the company. I was there as somebody who really understood kind of all the backgrounds of everything, and he knew all that too. But we had two people at the table, so they didn't think it was like a one-man band, right? And we really, I think, a big piece of this was we divided and conquered. We said the biggest thing to hurt our valuation or help our valuation is the performance of the business during the time that we're selling the business.
Mm-hmm.
And a recognition that this could take a year to do. We said, these are the people who are going to be working on the transaction, and the rest of you guys have to execute. We cannot miss a step. And so we really kind of divided the team up. It was Chris and I, and then we had our CFO, who was, as I said, was a transaction expert, and our VP of strategy. And we focused on anything that had to do with the transaction. Our VP of sales, our CTO, our support people, our services people, they had to make sure that that business ran. And so, Chris probably spent, 80% of his time making sure that that team was running the business. Yeah, maybe 60%. All right, I take it back. It varied, right?
Mm-hmm.
And probably 30 to 40% on the transaction. And I think that was one of the smartest things we did. I think that had we, as only one of us, tried to lead the transaction and run the company, it would have been very easy to trip during the process.
Well, and or not just suffocate yourself because it's so much work.
Yeah, I mean, it is an incredible amount of work. And I think everybody says that, but you don't realize it until you go through it, right? I mean, it is, and it's stressful, right? I mean, everything that you're doing is so important. It's like the most important sales process of your life. And so, and it's your baby, and you take it personally, and you care about the people, and half the time you're like schizophrenic because you're trying to run a business and you're trying to sell it at the same time. So, I mean, it's a challenge. But I mean, that was one of the great things about having our team, was that there was more than one of us to bear that burden.
I think it's extremely important what you said, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs try to do this themselves, and or what happens, Vicki, is you guys have so much, you had so much intentions that a lot of people get an out of the blue offer, and they get romantic around being courted, and they miss this entire process that you guys did. What was, shifting more into the deal structure? How was it structured? Did you guys realize, I mean, did you guys at negotiation get more clout because of how much work you'd done? And was it, cash up front? Was there earnouts involved? And, what was the kind of the after effect with the employees?
Yeah. Okay. So deal structure is very interesting. We had an incredibly clean deal. Incredibly clean. Like, I tell people what this deal was, and you're going to hear it and you're going to go, oh my God, that was the cleanest thing we've ever seen. We actually had a better offer. We had, as I said, we had multiple offers. We had two competing offers. And one of them was kind of like, that one isn't so attractive. But the one that was, so we had two offers. One was more than the other one. And it wasn't like orders of magnitude more. It wasn't like 5 times as much, but it was more, right? To a number that it would be important to us. But it just had hair all over it, right? It had oh, you're going to have to loan us the money to buy the company from you, and there's an earnout, and there's all this stuff has to go into escrow, and your warranties and reps are like lasting for a lifetime. And we looked at it and said, you know what? That's the number is a great number, but the deal is a bad deal. And the other company, Versata, who we ended up going with, was all cash, no earnouts, limited reps and warranties, and it represented the cleanest deal with the highest likelihood of closing at the agreed upon valuation. And we actually completed our due diligence in 45 days and closed for exactly the term sheet.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
And yeah, I know. I mean, and there was no earnout, limited reps and warranties, and no employment requirement. Whoa. They asked people to stay, but it wasn't a requirement of the deal.
Why was the two different offers? Why were they so different?
Because I think the other company was a company that didn't understand acquisitions the way that Versata did. And it was kind of they thought they were going to be clever, and it was kind of a bunch of lawyers, and they thought that they were going to, they thought that they were going to be very, clever and structure it and do all these clever things.
Was that a PE firm?
No, it was a software company, but they really, I think that they got a little too clever for themselves, and I think we went back to them and said, so much of this looks attractive, but you've made this deal look horrible. You want to make the deal look better? We're really interested, right? Because I think having an option to reinvest into and take a second bite was not unattractive to people. But we weren't going to do it at the expense of being able to get a fair price and with some certainty of getting our cash out of the business.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
so it didn't appeal to us. I think everybody looked at it and said, it's never going to play out the way we want it to. There's too much risk in it. And I think ultimately, I'm not sure we trusted the buyers.
Yep. That's a huge caveat.
Yeah.
Well, how did you tell your employees once the deal was closed with Versata? I mean, how did you expose the news?
Right. So there's a couple of things. First of all, our whole executive team knew that we were selling the company. And so, we had, everybody had stock in the company. There was something at stake for them. There was only one person, it was our CFO, who didn't have stock, and he had a transaction bonus set for himself. So we had structured that right. Our employees actually knew that we were in the market looking for financing. So we had positioned this that we were going to go into the market and look for investment. And I think that, so we talked to them about, some of our process and things that we were doing. And, we didn't say, oh, there's a high likelihood we're going to sell the company versus getting financing. But we didn't set it up that it was a complete surprise, and we weren't sneaking around after hours. We would have meetings when there were people in the office and, talk about it as something that we were spending time on, right? So I think when we did tell our employees, what we did was we had an all-company meeting. We had people in the office who were in town. We had, people overseas, and for the people overseas, we had one of our executive people go to that meeting. And so we tried to have people gathered in a place. Of course, there are always a few people who are remote by themselves. And we announced the transaction. And at that time, we announced a new CEO taking over the company, that, we were going to be there for some period of time during transition, right? And, then the Versata CEO got up and spoke about Versata and what they do and how they approach things. And then we had follow-up meetings with the management and with all the teams kind of immediately within, a day or two of making the announcement.
That what was the size of how many employees did you guys have at that point?
We had a little bit over 100.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of people. Was there any major concern or worries that they had?
Sure.
Who's Versada? What? Do I have a job?
Yeah, that was exactly it. I think, one of the things, you look, you know it while it's happening, but you don't really know it. You believe this while it's happening, but you don't really know it until after the fact, which is that people work for people. And so a lot of our team had grown up with our company, and they worked for us. They worked for the people who founded it, and we had a lot of relationships with people. And so, I think over time, they made a decision about whether they wanted to stay with Quantum. And by the way, Quantum is still there. It still exists. We still have all the customers that we had at the time. It's doing just fine. But people made a decision, do I want to work for Quantum, or was I really working for Vicki and the rest of the team and the culture and the environment that they had, right? And so over time, quite a few people left.
Overall, Vicki, do you feel good about the whole journey?
I think the journey was amazing. I can always point to things that I think could have been better during the journey, but I couldn't be prouder of, the people that I worked with, and the things that we were able to accomplish, and the value we were able to create for our customers, and what I was able to learn and do. It was amazing. And I certainly know a lot of things I'd do differently, both in terms of my next venture and my next business. But,
is there any major things right off the top that is it just, it's probably more technical based on your story, but what are some of the main highlights of, even though you feel good, what are the things that you would do differently next time?
Let's see. I think I would have been a little bit more intentional earlier on, in really trying to think those several moves down the board for the company, right? We kind of knew that we needed to do things, but we really, from that business model perspective, didn't make the changes that we needed. I think we would have probably started our strategic partnership strategy a lot earlier. If you believe that your ultimate exit is going to be, your best value is going to come through a strategic, it's really important to start to build those relationships in the market as early as you can.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and we had them, but we didn't have tight ones. We didn't have ones that we could, we worked with IBM, and we worked with Oracle, and we worked with Deloitte, and we worked with Accenture, but we didn't have tight relationships so that when the time came for us to think about selling our company, they would raise their hand and say, hey, we would want these guys.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked about that we probably would have made our shift to the business model earlier. I think there's structural things that we could have done to create value better, in terms of being more intentional about getting more customers and not bigger customers. I think one of the things we did suffer from was a concentration of large accounts. All of our customers were big customers. And so, we didn't have 1,000 customers.
Mm-hmm.
We had, 10, dozens of customers. And so they were great customers, and they were really big and huge and important. But when people look at valuation, they always they're afraid that if one of those leaves, it can impact the value, right?
Which you mitigated with some contracts, so which shows that you were very yep.
Yeah,
but still,
I tell people, get professional help, get a good investment banker, and get a good and trusted M&A lawyer. Don't just get your guy who does your contracts.
Right. Don't use your general counsel to take in a market.
If they don't do M&A transactions, get an M&A lawyer, because that can be, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, I'm paying this lawyer so much money, but those people can save you millions of dollars.
Right.
So,
as you're looking towards the future, Vicki, feeling good, and you mentioned next venture, how did you deal with the emotional and the mental readiness? It sounds, and kind kind of what we talked about. You got a lot of things going on. How did you deal with it? And then what are you doing now?
You know, leading the process, I always said that for Quantum, I was going to be the last man standing, that I believed so hard in it. And I was so emotionally invested in it that I would be the last one out the door. And leading the process of selling the company gets you over that really fast, because it is, it is so emotionally draining and mentally draining that by the time we sold the company, I was ready to sell the company. So I was able to kind of go through that process over a year's time because I was in the middle of it, right? I think it was harder for some of my other partners who weren't involved in the day-to-day. I think when it happened, it seemed to happen quickly. It's like, okay, we got our offer, and 45 days later, we sold. The company was done.
Right.
I mean, they were gone, and I think they had a harder time probably than I did. I think the cool thing is, I certainly took time off. I played a lot of golf. It takes you a good 6 months to decompress, but what I have realized is that this experience is something that I can use to help other people, and so I really started to focus my time on mentoring and advising. Started beefing up and doing a lot of more nonprofit work. I sit on a nonprofit board. I'm involved with a nonprofit engaged philanthropy organization where I provide kind of consultative services. And then over time, put that into really paid. Now I do paid board work. I work as part of Techstars as part of their mentoring. And I'm doing strategic advisory services, so really kind of CEO, CXO type of support on a retainer basis.
Super cool.
And so, much of my focus now is assisting fast-growing companies and their evolving businesses and helping them with looking for sustainable business models and growth and long-term value and ultimately a successful exit.
That's awesome. You having fun?
I am having fun. I am looking for what's next. I would love to land somewhere and work with a great team again to create that kind of value that you have when the company is yours, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a piece of it versus just the consulting role. I think that gets a little lonely sometimes. But, I feel very good about, where we landed, and certainly, being able to go through that journey and create jobs for people and create value for our customers, makes me feel good about what I was able to do for the last decade. So
I love it, and I think you hit on so many good pieces of wisdom throughout this. It was and it was intentionality. I think you guys just did an awesome job, and I'm happy that you're out the other end thinking about all the fun things you can be doing. And appreciate you coming on the show, Vicki. If there's one way that our listeners can get in touch with you, what would be the best way?
Probably the best way would be to look me up on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story on the show. I really appreciate it.
No problem, Ryan. It was my pleasure.